Nicole Cooley is a creative writer from Brooklyn, New York, who currently teaches English at Queens College, City University of New York. Her poems, which include The Red Shoes and Romance, have been published in such periodicals as the New England Review, The Nation, Poetry, Southern Poetry Review, and Poetry Northwest, among others. Cooley is also the author of 2 books, a novel, Judy Garland, Ginger Love, and a book of poems, Resurrection, which received the 1995 Walt Whitman Poetry Award from the Academy of American Poets. While at AAS in 1999, she conducted research into the Salem witch trials of 1692. The result is her book, which we are selling this evening, called The Afflicted Girls. It was just published by the Louisiana State University Press. Please join me in welcoming back to AAS and Worcester, Nicole Cooley.
Can everyone hear okay? Yeah. Thank you, Jim, and thank you to AAS and to the Worcester County Poetry Association. It's fantastic to be here in this room where I researched the book. It feels kind of magical to be back here reading from it. What I'd like to do tonight is talk a little about my project and read some poems from the book. And I think I'll talk a little first and then read some poems and talk as I read. My fellowship at AAS in the summer of 1999, as Jim mentioned, was absolutely pivotal to my book. It's called The Afflicted Girls, and it is about the Salem witch trials of 1692. The summer I came here to research the book, though, I learned more than I ever thought possible about the Salem witch trials, more than I ever thought possible about 17th century America, and actually more than I ever thought possible about my own poetry. Because of the generous, kind, and knowledgeable staff at AAS, and people here are wonderful, no question is too strange or arcane or weird for them. It really helped me track down everything. And because of the incredible collection of materials, my book was greatly enriched and developed. Now, Wallace Stevens once said that poetry is a scholar's art. And this has really rung true for me in the way I think about my writing. I love research. I've always wondered about the fact that poetry is supposed to be very personal and true and about the actual author, but fiction is allowed to be made up and about a transformed universe. And I thought to myself, well, why can't we have a poetry that's also about a made-up universe that isn't necessarily about the poet? After I wrote my first book of poetry, I really wanted to write something different. To be honest, I was a little bit bored with myself, and I wanted to write poetry that wasn't just about me. And ever since I was a child, I've been really, really fascinated by the Salem witch trials. I'd read The Crucible when I was 12. I think it was one of the first kind of grown-up books I ever read. And it really made an impression on me. And so, in 1996, I returned to thinking about the Salem witch trials. So what I'm interested in this book that I'm going to read from is the way in which poems can be about voices that are not the poet's own voice in particular. And I set it as my task to try to resurrect some of the voices from the Salem witch trials. I was thinking of the accusers, the accused, bystanders, anyone whose life was affected by the trials was interesting to me when I was thinking about the book. Now, as Jim mentioned, I'm also a fiction writer, and a lot of people said to me, well, why don't you write this as a novel? Why do you want to write this as poetry? And I did think about that. There are actually a bunch of novels about the Salem witch trials, especially in the young adult market. But it seems to me that poetry has the ability to raise a different set of questions about history than fiction does. Because poetry is a genre that is so dependent on voice and voicing. And then, as my research at AAS revealed, the Salem witch trials actually has an even more complicated relationship to voice than I ever imagined. So, The Afflicted Girls is composed of 4 different kinds of poems, and I'll probably try to read an example of each. Poems that narrate the experience of the witch trials from the viewpoint of specific people, real people, whose voices I try to inhabit. Poems that reference and incorporate colonial American verse forms, the sermon, the Jeremiah, things like that. Those were very fun to work on. Poems that pay tribute to the archival experience, poems that are about being in this room, in fact, and poems that investigate the lasting effects of the Salem witch trials on America. I spent some time in Salem. I don't know if people have been to those museums. I suspect you all have. In Salem, I have some poems about those museums as well. pleasures of writing this book, and this has to do with being in AAS, was reading history and meeting historians. I have to say that as a working poet, it really changed my methodology and my way of working to watch the historians every morning come into this room, set down their computers, and start working. It really, I think, made me a more precise writer, and it made me take a look at small facts and pieces of information and details that I might not have thought of. And also, I had the good fortune to cross paths when I was at AAS with a historian of Salem, Elizabeth Reese. I think her book is listed on the sheet of other things you could read. And her book is wonderful, but what was really great about meeting her was I could talk to her as I was writing. I would say, what do you think about this character in the Salem witch trials? And she would talk to me about that. Or I'd say, is this fact correct? I'd have her read my manuscript. We would talk about the different people. She'd say, why don't you write about this? And I'd think, okay, maybe I will. So that was a rare and unique opportunity. And I think it's one of the great things that can happen at AAS, that kind of cross-fertilization. And I was really lucky. It was just a fluke that she was here. So I want to start reading a couple of the poems to give you a sense of the book. The book opens with a short preface. It's just a kind of prose poem paragraph, and I'm going to begin with that because it sets the stage, I think. In late 1691, in the middle of a cold, bleak New England winter, several young girls from Salem Village refused to eat. They choked. They lost their powers of speech, sight, and hearing. They claimed they were bitten and pinched by unseen bodies. Based on their array of symptoms, a doctor made the diagnosis. The evil hand is upon them. Hereafter, they would be known as the afflicted girls. Who torments you? The Reverend Samuel Parris asked, and the girls began to answer. In the summer of 1692, 19 people and 2 dogs were executed by hanging. 1 man was pressed to death, and more than 150 people were sent to prison, where several, including a baby born in jail, died. Cotton Mather wrote, "No place that I know of has got such a spell upon it as will always keep the devil out." And I want to start now with a poem that speaks to the archival experience. As I said, the more time I spent at AAS researching, the more I realized that the role of the poet wasn't just to collect information and kind of channel the voices in this case, but I started thinking about what it was like to do this research and what the archive was as a repository of information and how the poet could be an archivist. So this poem speaks to that experience of being here. It's the first poem in the book. It's called Archival Silence. A slipcase keeps the book of voices safe, till I untie the string, holding the broken spine together. Then I wait. When the pages open on the table, they could crack into pieces. On Gallows Hill, rope burns the neck before the body breaks. Up on the scaffolding, have you last words? I don't have words, because I'm nothing but a collection of evidence. Stories splintered in all directions. Voices I can't fasten to the page. History disappearing before I write it down. Say it, unsay it. History choked me. History took hold of my throat. Another thing that I realized when researching at AAS, I realized that even if you never put it in the poem, you need to know what people ate for breakfast in 1692, what color they painted their walls, what time they went to sleep, and obviously there's all these things that aren't in the book at all, but if anyone wants to know any Puritan trivia after the reading, I'm happy to share it. But the more I researched the kind of background of the Salem witch trials, the more I kept coming up against metaphor. And the language from 1692 is so amazing and rich. You could just read it forever. I never read anything. But the metaphors really were striking to me. And the metaphors that were used to describe the Salem witch trials were especially striking. And that's what this next poem is about. It's called Outbreak. As if land could be a body, as if its skin could swell and stretch and blister, as if under a scab of grass blood stops in its tracks, as if the road's loose stones gag in the river's throat, as if the field is a mother, nipples leaking milk hard with infection, as if the village is an eye shut tight, iris flecked with mucus but still watching, as if the devil is an Indian, as if the devil never found his way to Salem Village before this year, as if I could hold the book, open the box, unfold the map's blurred edges, bring back this whole lost story. Along with the metaphors, I think what really drove me to want to write the book was the girls that made the accusations in the Salem witch trials, the 12-year-old and up girls. And I started with a question, which is, why would they want to make the accusations? Why did they accuse certain people and not others? And there are many theories on that, but I thought, really, fundamentally, what was it like to be a 12-year-old girl in 1692? And that was really very interesting to research, because there's wonderful work done on early American culture and gender. And the more I thought about that, the more I realized how confining their lives must have been and how difficult they must have been too. So in this next poem, which is the title poem of the book, I tried to imagine their lives and sort of put myself in their shoes, so to speak, and think about what it would really be like to be them. The afflicted girls know what they want, just this fury of happiness. It's the refrain of men's voices saying their names. It's their testimony on their own mother's tongues. It's their words repeating, like a hand slapping a girl's face over and over. Abigail, Mary, Mercy, Elizabeth. Who said vengeance? They love the meeting house's cold, whitewashed walls where their accusations scrawl and climb the surface in beautiful script. She's a witch, I name her as a witch. No girls in Salem Village are allowed to go to school. No girls can hold a writing tablet on their laps, eggshell white, color of the nightgowns they are taught to sew. No girls hope for a place in memory. Who said vengeance? We know what they want. To speak in unison, to have a single voice, to inhabit this one body all the way to the future. After I wrote that poem, I didn't feel completely satisfied that I'd explored the question, so I wrote a poem that was a companion piece to it. I didn't grow up in New England. I actually grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, and only lived in New England during college, which doesn't really count. And so people were always saying, well, do you have any descendants in the Salem witch trials? Why are you so interested? What is it? Why are you so interested? People in New Orleans, or my families, were especially baffled. Like, why? So this poem is called The Afflicted Girls, New Orleans, 1978, because I did not try to put them back in the 70s in New Orleans, those girls. But I did start thinking, what is it about that experience in my own life? Although my book is not autobiographical, isn't poetry always really autobiographical, even if we're saying it's not? I started thinking, what about myself at age 12, basically? And this poem explores that. It's dedicated actually to my best friend from childhood who still lives in New Orleans. The Afflicted Girls, New Orleans, 1978. Bruise on the girl's backbone. Contusion, their fingers pressure under into her ribs, her spine. They believe a spirit will lift her from the carpet, the color of baby aspirin, from this house, this middle school sleepover. Light as a feather, stiff as a board. See how the girl rises. See how the others can fake any magic. Texadrine licked off a tracing paper, off a half-drawn map of New England, where none of them have been. Heat drums against their necks. They want to believe a spirit can lift them out of themselves. They want to believe they lift each other. Light as a feather. Last year, they practiced tongue kissing on each other's hands. Last year, they were children. Now they're grown up. they know how to hurt each other. I call back to the girls. I say, don't stay here forever on this small square of floor, believing only in your own fists, your fingers. Stand up, walk out, let your voices lunge and stagger all the long way out of childhood. I don't know if anyone ever did that light as a feather, stiff as a board thing at sleepovers. Some people are nodding, but it kind of does work. Where you lift people up with the fingers, and I don't know why, but it's probably better not to think too much about it. When I was working on the Salem Witch Trials, I was really aware that there's a lot written on the Salem Witch Trials. I mean, everybody knows about it. And a lot of people have read The Crucible and seen the movie, and it's very, it's almost kind of an overdetermined thing to write about, and you come up against all of that when writing about it. So I started thinking about something that the poet Rita Dove said when she was writing her book, Thomas and Beulah. She said that she wanted to explore the underside of the story. And that made a lot of sense to me with the Salem Witch Trials. I didn't want to write about the characters that we've all seen, you know, the Daniel Day-Lewis character in the Crucible movie, that kind of thing. I wanted to write about the characters we didn't really hear much about or hear much from, and kind of, you know, bear witness to their voices. And I think the saddest and most disturbing and upsetting and compelling person in the whole narrative for me was a 4-year-old girl named Dorcas Good, who I tried desperately to track through all of my reading on Salem. And she was accused of being a witch because her mother, Sarah Good, was one of the first 3 accused. And then she was put in jail for 11 months, and after that, she apparently went crazy, they say, and no one could find her. Her father tried to get reparations for her afterwards, but there's no record of her at all. She totally disappeared. So you can imagine the 4-year-old in jail by herself for 11 months. Her mother was executed. Her little baby sister died in jail. And she really struck me from sort of the first things I read about in Salem. So I have a few poems from her point of view. This is one of them. It's called Testimony the Mother, and I really tried to imagine what it would be like to be her. And also, I have a 3.5-year-old, and so I'm thinking a lot about 3.5 to 4-year-olds. And I asked my daughter if she was a witch. She said yes. And I said, am I a witch? And she said yes. And so you see how easily the trial could go. That's just anecdotal evidence, but I think it's true. 2 other things about this poem that might help to background it. One is that one way that they tested people to see if they were really a witch was they asked them to repeat the Lord's Prayer, and if they faltered at all, then they were a witch. And of course, in that situation, you can imagine how that went. The other thing is that one fact I uncovered was that when, in the 17th century, when people spoke of choking, they called it the suffocation of the mother, and often they just abbreviated it as the mother. And that's one of those facts that when you find out you have to write a poem around it, you know, somehow, because it's really so provoking. So, the poem is called Testimony the Mother, Dorcas Good. Snow fills the fields like milk. Inside the meeting house, I wait on the communion table. I unbutton my muslin dress while the Reverend reads. To the Marshal of Essex or his deputy, you are in their magistrates' names hereby required to bring before us Dorcas Good. I am 4 years old. My dress drops from my body. The 3 girls circle, calling, the mother, holding their throats with their hands. I close my eyes. I'm outside in the snow, standing in the harbor's dark throat we followed here to the New Jerusalem. Or I'm with my mother in Ipswich jail. The Reverend holds a candle close to each girl's wrist, to the teeth marks in a row like tiny stitches they say are mine. In jail, my mother pulls me into her lap, cradles my head against her chest as my mouth reaches for her nipple. Here is the devil's mark. The Reverend raises my hand for all to see. A small red bite, a perfect circle on my palm. Did a yellow bird suck here between your fingers? I close my eyes and the bird spreads its wings on my mother's shoulders, hiding us, keeping us safe. Now, child, repeat the prayer. On the table, my arms stretched out. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. I could be a bird. The girls still circle. When I look at them, they fall against each other, like the rag dolls my mother arranged on my bed at home. I want to be invisible. I want to go back to my mother's body. Branches snap off the black trees on Gallows Hill. Ice cracks on the roof of the jail. This girl is a witch. The men in the front pew nod. The girls let go of their throats. Does my mother sleep in jail alone? I want to call to her. I can't. My body stands straight and still on the examining table, my voice torn out. Another figure that I became interested in when I was at AAS was Giles Corey, and some of you may be familiar with him. There's a play by Longfellow that has sort of given us most of our information about him. And Giles Corey had an unusual punishment. He was executed in an unusual way. He was pressed to death with stones in a way that people were in England. He requested this punishment, apparently. It's hard to tell what happened with Giles Corey, what really happened and what happened in the Longfellow play. They really merged together. But they say that as he was having the stones put on him, he kept saying, more weight, and asking for more. I don't know. I couldn't find that substantiated, but it's in the play. But this poem really picks up on the language that was used in the trial transcripts, which are available through the WPA. You can get them at public libraries and online. The language that was used to describe the way Giles Corey afflicted the girls, I thought was really interesting. And so some of that is in the poem. You can tell from some of the pronunciations. It's called He or His Apparition. It has an epigraph from one of the judges in the trials who says, about noon at Salem, Giles Corey was pressed to death for standing mute. The girl's testimony is gravel scattered on the grass. Ann Putnam. Giles Corey or his appearance has most grievously afflicted me by beating, pinching, and almost choking me to death. Inside the meeting house, each afflicted girl repeats the next. Mercy Lewis. I verily believe in my heart that Giles Corey is a dreadful wizard, for since he has been in prison, here his appearance has come and most grievously tormented me. The copier flattens the page, hammers down identical speech. Sarah Bibber. I have been most grievously afflicted by Giles Corey or his appearance. But the man won't speak to defend or plead. He sits still and silent in his pew. Mary Warren. At the time of his examination, I saw Corey or his apparition most dreadfully afflict Mary Walcott, Ann Putnam, Mercy Lewis, and Sarah Bibber. The morning of his execution, the meeting house floods with light. Outside, a circle rises around the punished man. The magistrates pile stone after stone on his ribs to crush him into speech. Nobody can see the lesson. Nothing can drive the voice out of the body. I'm going to read two more poems. And afterwards, if anyone wants to have questions or discuss, I'd love to talk about Salem Witch Trials or poetry or whatever. It's impossible to offend me, so you can ask anything. But I would really enjoy that. So two more poems. This is the second to last one, and it's called Mary Warren's Sampler. Mary Warren is an interesting figure in the Salem Witch Trials to me because she accused others of being a witch, and then she herself was accused. And so that kind of flip-flop was very provoking to me. Also, again, I was imagining what it was like to be these characters, which was so unsettling and fun and delightful and scary and everything else. I miss these people now that I'm done with the book, actually. I was imagining what it was like to be these characters, and I thought, what do these girls do all day? And I started researching handicrafts of the 17th century and thinking about samplers and stitching and embroidery, and the poem also spun out of that. I was imagining what the texture of the day was like in 1692 for a teenage girl. So this poem also has an epigraph, again from two judges. They say, "You were a little while ago an afflicted person, now you are an afflictor. How comes this to pass?" Mary Warren's Sampler. Reversible stitches. My mother and I leaned over a single piece of English linen. I I want her smooth white hands, not my master's fingers, pinching the skin along my backbone, voice breathing, Mary, single satin stitch. I stand before the court and I say, I am sorry for it, I am sorry, and the girls shut their eyes. At home he struck my arm, I hid behind the spinning wheel, I hid from him. Chain stitch. I gripped my mother's wrist, her cold hand folded on the sheet of the bed we shared. I will tell, I will tell. He said he'd thrash the devil out of me. He said he'd drown me in the creek behind the barn. Lace filling stitch. Mother's pattern book open on my lap. I copied, a noble and generous fear proceeds from love in silk thread. I licked my finger, my black spit leaked onto the page. The girls at any moment will fall down together, hands set at their throats to show I am a witch. My master's iron tongs could burn me out of my fit. Fishbone stitch. My mother bent over the cloth, head bowed to tie each small knot. I touched her gleaming hair. In the court, I bite my lips and whisper the lesson. Fear proceeds from love. Love is fear. Buttonhole stitch. He told me, if you are afflicted, I wish you were more afflicted. My fingers blackened bread and butter when I set his table, and I screamed, back stitch to the past, to the edge of Eve's body rearranged at the sampler's border, to fear, to the marks along my arm his fingers made like stitches. He called me his jade, his body crushing line, until darting stitch, cross stitch, loop stitch. I will tell, it was the devil's book my master proctor brought to me. As witness, my hand, Mary Warren. When you research these kind of confessions and testimonies, it's really interesting because most people couldn't sign their names, and so you can do an X. And I think that also made me think about what these testimonies mean and what they're worth. In a strange reversal in the Salem witch trials, if you confessed, your life was spared. So it was a reversal of how it usually works. And when I first found that out, I thought, why didn't everyone just lie and confess? But the more I began to research, the more I realized that a lie in 1692 is very different from a lie in 2004, and that even if I were back in 1692, I might not have told a lie. So I started thinking about the status of a lie, and that again led me down a whole other path. So the last poem that I'm going to read is another poem that actually takes place in this room and speaks to the experience of the archive. It's called Archival in the Reading Room. Archival in the Reading Room. Circle of light. Inside my world turns safely miniature, and a cart clatters over gravel to drag the narrative out of that century. Pine table. Book as big as a matchbox, keeps the past contained and ordered by a blue-edged morning paper. Glass room. Summer narrows to exclude anything but a snap as the book clasps shut like a necklace. Desire. To have no body. To become the book lying open on the cradle. To stay here. To watch these words subtract the world around them. Thank you.